Hey guys, Axalon here. So, I've been meaning to kind of do this for a little while, but I figured, given how I had to end Assassin's Creed Odyssey, I'd go ahead and throw it out here now. So basically, the goal is I'm going to go ahead and try to start doing some basic reviews of games that I've played on the channel. Currently, I don't have any plans to go back to previous games I've done like a year ago or whatever, and retroactively review them, since they aren't all that fresh in my mind, so it's not really fair, because I forget things or not remember things, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stick to only games I've recently completed, starting with Odyssey. The reason I'm kind of doing this is because I kind of want to expand on what I'm doing here a little bit, a tiny little bit. Plus, the reason I'm doing it the way I'm doing it is that way not only do you see what you're currently watching, which is this review video, but you have the entire LP on file here at the channel as a reference should you choose to look into it. With the caveat on that being that for Odyssey, it actually isn't the full LP because the last 4 hours were destroyed. But that's fine. So please bear with me as I kind of stumble my way through this. I hope that as I keep doing these, I'll get a better handle on how I want to do my own particular review format. But without any further ado, let's get started. So first, I just want to say that despite what some may perceive as a lot of complaints, I don't think the game is bad necessarily. But the complaints I did have, they were just always at the forefront of my mind while I was playing this game. And just every time something went wrong, it was typically either the same complaint or a similar one. I was like, God, this thing happened to me again and again. But I just want to get them out of the way with first. So let's go ahead and talk about the story first. Spoilers are involved, so if you don't want to be spoiled on the story of this game, please go to the timestamp indicated in the video. You can also check the video description, as I'll be marking out each individual section with timestamps. So, let's go ahead and get into it. If I had to rate the story on a scale from 1 to 10, I would give it a solid meh. M-E-H, meh. Just meh. Personally, I think the sheer size of the game actually hurts the story at times, which is one reason that I make this particular LP into basically hour-long segments. Typically, I don't like hour-long videos, but I learned from Origins that the typical half-hour videos, just I'd be doing this game forever. And I'm not gonna do that again. So I basically cut the amount of videos in half from what I was going to do, which is nice for me. If you don't like watching hour-long videos, I'm sorry, but I wasn't going to be spending the next several months doing half-hour videos for Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I need to move on at some point. But anyway, I found that no matter how much I wanted to just blast through the main story, occasionally I would have to put it on hold to do some side mission or something, which may or may not have had a connection to the main story, just so that I could finally progress further. I mean, there was nothing in particular stopping me from trying to do the main story right away, because I could just do the main story mission whenever I wanted, but the level gating just makes the mission much more difficult, radically more difficult, if you're under-leveled. So I opted to instead grind for levels so that I was at an even playing field with what the game said I had to be. This may have been a deliberate move by Ubisoft to make more of an epic feel in tune with the game's title of Odyssey, but I often found myself bored while trying to get my level higher so I could get back to the actual main story. I found most side quests were unmemorable, and I'd be hard-pressed to actually name 5 side quests off the top of my head. I don't mean the random miscellaneous time side quests. I mean the legitimate yellow exclamation point side quests. I could not name you 5 of them. Maybe you can. Good for you. I can't, personally. Maybe I could manage, I don't know, 3? But I've done like dozens upon dozens, if not 100 of these side quests. Maybe not 100, I don't know. But they're just not memorable. As for the characters themselves, they're mostly forgettable. Alexios, I played as Alexios, which you would see in my LP. Alexios is fine. He's not the most compelling of protagonists, but he has his moments. I assume Cassandra is basically the same way. I mean, they seem to be pretty cookie-cutter, aside from one's a man, one's a woman. But the characters themselves are mostly forgettable. There's this one character, Brasidas. He gets this really cool, like, super unique introductory cutscene, and him and Alexios, they're like kicking ass together, and then he later dies, like at a later point in the story, and Alexios is all pissed off, and all I remember is going, oh, well, he's dead, because honestly, I didn't care about him. Like, he shows up, he helps you in his introductory mission or whatever, then he shows up again later, he gives you basically what the Paragon option, so for those familiar with Mass Effect, you had Paragon, aka be the good guy option, and Renegade, aka be the bad guy option. And Brasidas was like your Paragon option both times that he shows up in a quest. And then after you're done with that, he's killed off fighting Deimos. And he's done. Like that's it for that guy. He had his own special cutscene, and he's done. Deimos is the other, I think, major character. And I find that there isn't too much to them as well. I think the thing that threw me off about Deimos is the fact that they were thrown off. Like, here's what I mean. So, somehow, as a baby, they survive being thrown off a mountain, and then they get taken in by the Cult of Cosmos and raised as their champion, blah, 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 blah. Now, don't get me wrong. Assassin's Creed main characters, they all have this superpower of jumping off of like high objects into haystacks without being harmed, but this is basically a completely new level entirely. And to be fair, as the player, you can also do this. And the explanation for what I can gather is that the Spear of Leonidas, which you carry, the broken like tip of it you carry with you, and you use as basically your hidden blade in this game, is an ancient magical technological artifact spear, basically. And it keeps you alive when you jump off a mountain and hit solid ground like 100 feet down or whatever, however however tall the building is. And your legs don't break or anything. Like, the spear keeps you whole. You can even upgrade it to the point where you take 0 fall damage. So it's like, clearly, the spear is what's doing it. Because you can upgrade the spear and now you don't even get hurt. It protects you from fall damage. So I found that to be an acceptable, if slightly contrived, explanation as to why the player can do that. But like the baby, I was confused about. The baby doesn't have the spear. So how does the baby survive and not instantly die so that it can grow up to become Deimos? Like, the only explanation I can think of is that the baby was wrapped in the ancient shroud of plot armor divinitas, because it doesn't make any sense otherwise. But anyway, the story you can basically divide it into 3 distinct parts. You have your family storyline, the Cult of Cosmos storyline, and finally you have the Atlantis storyline. Personally, I found the Atlantis storyline doesn't really blend into the first two and seems more like endgame content, while the family and cult storylines are a bit woven together for a time. The Cult of Cosmos is obviously the proto-Templar villain group of their era and this game, basically because they are an elusive order of powerful people dictating the nature of a war. And in the meantime, the family questline is basically about, it involves the cultists, but it's more about trying to mend your broken family and the various degrees of success or failure you accomplish in doing so. The story also takes quite a few liberties in terms of some of the historical accuracy. Now, Assassin's Creed, I will go ahead and just throw that disclaimer out there right now. Assassin's Creed has never been perfect with historical accuracy. I already know people are on their keyboards like, oh, none of the games are... I know. I'm with you. They've never been perfect with it, but they at least made an attempt in the past. Now, maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just less knowledgeable about, say, the Italian Renaissance or the Crusades than I am on ancient Greece. Maybe those older games also, really messed up the timeline and, historical accuracy, and I'm just not aware of it. And if that's the case, shame on the older games too. But right now, we are talking about Odyssey, not Brotherhood or Assassin's Creed 3 or 5 or whatever. Odyssey. For instance, Ubisoft has said that Cassandra, and not Alexios, is the canon player character of the game. So, already, I have problems with this when it comes to the story, because I find it odd that the main quest involves actively competing for Sparta in the Olympics, when mixed gender Olympics, they weren't a thing back then at all. Even in our, more modern and progressive society today, the Olympics started having, the mixed gender sports around the year 1900. Posts all this by a huge degree. And even then, it was only in select sports, in select events. So to have it happen in the ancient Greek Olympics, where attitudes were decisively more old-fashioned, I don't know, to me it was kind of bizarre, and it took me out of the immersion of the game world, which is never a good thing for a game to do, unless you're a Deadpool game or something, because he breaks the fourth wall all the time, and by breaking your immersion, he brings you into the immersion of his non-immersive, immersive comic book crazy logic world. But here it was just, I don't know. I distinctly remember being very confused in my playthrough as Alexios, and I wondered if Cassandra, if you played as her, you did something different in her version of the story. Something I think would have been great as a way to highlight the differences between these two characters aside from what chromosome they have. But so after I finished it, I actually looked it up, and nothing changes. Cassandra just takes on all the male competitors, beats them, wins the Olympic Pancratian division for Sparta, gets the wreath and the big ceremony. I mean, even if we were to assume Sparta would be fine with having a woman compete in the Olympics, the other Greek nations, they barely bat an eye that she's competing, instead of the original planned contender who just so happens to die in a freak accident just before the event started. They're just oh, it's you, okay. It's not even a case of ignorance on the part of the developers either. Because there's a side quest involving a woman scheduled to be executed for the crime of, now wait for it, watching the Olympics, which was a real crime back in those days. I know it's hard to think of nowadays, but back then, this was serious stuff. The quest itself was loosely based on a woman who disguised herself as a man to, I believe, was to enter her son into the Olympics, and he won his event, and then accidentally revealed herself in the immediate celebration afterwards, and the Greeks let her off out of respect for her family lineage involved in the Olympics, because basically her family was consisted of just Olympic champions everywhere. But then, after they let her off, they took further precautions. They passed a new law just for this, to ensure that her trick couldn't be pulled off again, and they made all trainers enter the Olympic Games naked. That way they knew for sure. So you're telling me that these guys are perfectly okay with a woman wanting to compete against male Olympic athletes when just being a trainer was punishable by death, and they only let her off in the first place because her family was full of Olympic champions? It doesn't make sense. This is not me trying to be oh, no, women are no good, misogyny. That's not about that. It's just, it doesn't make sense for the world. It's one thing to give a character superpowers, like the Apple of Eden or something, but it's another when you've literally just changed how the world works. One thing is gameplay, but now you're saying this is how it could happen. It's not how it could happen at all. But speaking of, there's a side quest later on involving the Daughters of Artemis and how you can become their leader. You hunt a bunch of legendary animals, and you take their pelts and you bring them to prove that you're this ultimate hunter. But I think that quest actually made more sense as Cassandra, because since I was playing as Alexios in my LP, I became literally the only man in charge of this all-female faction. And it's like, I remember being just as confused about how Alexios was the leader here, since I thought Cassandra made more sense in this instance with the Daughters of Artemis, as opposed to the Olympics, where I think Alexios makes more sense, because the Olympics is a main quest, and the Daughters of Artemis is an optional side quest. I think overall the problem would have just been fixed by making Alexios the canon player character. The side quest issue with the Daughters of Artemis still remains, but that's just a side quest anyway, so it's not mandatory. Like with the Olympics, Ubisoft's like, they bent history over backwards and then just snapped it like game-breaking Batman to fit the character in. And I'm not saying other AC games were perfect either. This one was just more glaring to me than other games have been in the past. And then, of course, there's the whole Atlantis storyline. And that ends with the revelation that Alexios or Cassandra, whoever you're playing as, has survived into the modern day, perfectly preserved, and they meet the modern day protagonist, Layla, and then they kill themselves. and Layla's just like, oh no, they died. And then she just hops back into the Animus like nothing happened. I'm just like, what? Like, first off, why would you not keep them alive? Like, they could offer so much insight. Like, Alexios predates every other protagonist, even Bayek. Like, Alexios came before him. You know, but nope, just dead. It was very anticlimactic. And honestly, I'm not even sure why they threw it in the game at all. Like, what was the purpose of this? Like, maybe it's supposed to take inspiration from, like, the classic concept of a Greek tragedy? Because there are plenty of quests that ended tragically, which I kind of appreciated, since not everything ended with some sugar-sweet climax, but it's so out of left field, and then he just dies, and then, like, the Layla character doesn't care and just hops back in the Animus to, like, oh, I'll just go back through his memories. I'm like, but why not keep the actual person alive? Why not take a fresh DNA sample from him first, you know? I'm so confused about it. This next bit is going to segue between story and gameplay, since I can't really talk about one without really talking about the other. So I understand that games should first and foremost be fun. But once again, they're kind of completely changing how history worked in order to do so, and I know, at least in the past, they tried to, like, pride themselves in how, you know, historically accurate they attempted to make their games. And for me, that was one of the coolest things about Assassin's Creed, was that it was a science fiction game, because you're using the Animus to relive ancestral memories. It's a, nonsense science fiction device. But 90% of the actual narrative takes place in a historical setting. So what am I talking about at this specific time? I'm talking about conquest battles. Now, I'm pretty sure, now tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of major battles in this time period were fought using the old phalanx formation. And Odyssey ditches this concept entirely and embraces like a more Hollywood-style 300 type, which is far more actionized. But even 300, which is highly romanticized and Hollywoodized, there's a version of the story where the Spartans barely even used any armor. Even they actually used a phalanx before eventually breaking out into the Hollywood action sequence. With Odyssey, it just abandons it altogether. Like, you see what looks like a phalanx at the very start of the game, and then, it's done. I'm not saying the game should literally be played in phalanx all the time, because that doesn't make sense, because we're not a soldier fighting for Athens or Sparta, who should be the ones using it. Just that this was something changed for the sake of gameplay. But given that we're not a soldier, I think it would have made more sense to just not have these battles at all. Just scrap conquest battles from the game entirely, and instead have your actions off the battlefield have an impact on the battle or even just the war itself. Maybe you've killed off all their generals or all their, battlefield leaders or heroes. So improperly prepared soldiers have to step up, and it costs, one side of battle. Kind of like an assassin, where they assassinate important figures. Huh. Imagine that. Well, Ubisoft instead, they seem to want to go for like the demigod, superhero, magical power, mercenary approach, which has its own merits, I admit, but the abandonment of the phalanx is really just a long-winded way of me asking why I can't use a shield at all in ancient Greece. And once again, I'm not asking for phalanx, since I don't want to be playing in one. I just wanted to see them used at some point. I just want the option of using a shield. Like, I find it odd that they deliberately chose to expand the skill system from Origins, and they added, new, levels to the perks and more perks in general, but you can't use a shield in ancient Greece. Like, it blows my mind. Like, you expand the skill system, but then you also just completely remove a mechanic from the game entirely. Given the massive Hollywood-style approach to action, that was taken with this game, was it too much to ask for something similar to, I don't know, 2004's Troy, at the very least, when Hector duels Achilles? In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Alexios using the broken spear sword combo wasn't inspired by this film, given that at one point, Hector loses his shield in the fight and picks up a broken spear to dual wield against Achilles in that film as well, basically exactly like what Alexios does in this game. Like, I just find the removal of the shield odd, given the time period. On top of that, practically every other enemy in-game is able to use a shield against you, while the closest we get to ever using a shield is when we briefly grab the enemy shield to use it as part of the shield disarming technique. And maybe this was just to emphasize the whole Greek demigod status or something, but I didn't like not having the option, at the very least, of using a shield. Like, I don't like when games, especially games in a franchise, remove options, because once you remove options, it's just, I feel like it starts snowballing into less creativity. I mean, there's still plenty of creativity in the game, but it's just like, well, now I have one less option to deal with enemies. Like, I would have gladly traded being unable to teleport stab opponents, which you can't do in open combat anyway for some reason, for being able to block arrows or just random sword strikes in battle. Especially since using a shield was a thing in Origins, which was the game immediately preceding this one, running on the same exact game engine as well, so I don't understand. I mean, I know why they did it. I say I don't understand, I know why. Not having a shield forces you to focus more on dodging and parrying when in melee combat. Like, that's the reasoning here. But Origins had already solved that problem with heavy unblockable attacks, which you could neither block or parry. So again, it's like you already have anti-defensive moves, set up in the previous game for you. It's like, why not use them? And believe me, they do still use heavy unblockable attacks in this game. Sometimes they even spam them at times. So, I mean, that very easily they could have just countered a shield with those. I don't know. Hunter skills remain as OP as they did in Origins, if not better. I do actually kind of miss the various bows Bayek could use that accomplished basically everything Alexios could do, aside from a couple of new abilities. And he didn't have to use adrenaline for a lot of them. Maybe it's just me, I don't know. I find it funny when this Greek demigod warrior with a magical ancient technology spear can do these things, and then what is essentially some Egyptian cop can basically do the exact same thing with less effort, depending on what type of bow he has equipped. I don't know, I just think it's kind of funny. Like, Bayek in some ways can do things that Alexios needs magic to perform. It's just funny. In fact, this is probably why I like games like Brotherhood over Origins or Odyssey, at least on a gameplay front. Gameplay mixed with story front. Because there's less superpowers. When Altair or Ezio kill someone, they didn't do it because they could fire magical arrows that go through solid rock, or control the direction of an arrow mid-flight, or even have like a premonition of when the opponent was going to attack, because that's what Alexios says about the spear at one point. Instead, they had trained in how best to kill an enemy and could just counter the opponent. That's why the counter skills of the assassins were legendary. Like it's to the point where I've honestly wondered, like, how good even is Alexios if he just didn't have the spear at all? Like, how would he compare to Altair or Connor, who did the things they did through sheer natural physical talent and skill? Like, what would they do? Like, would Connor just beast him in a fight? I think he would. Connor was a monster, and he didn't have magical powers except beyond his basic eagle vision and the haystack jumping. That's it. But speaking of natural physical talent and skill, this brings me to my next point. And that's the level gating. I did not like it in Origins, and I don't like it here either. I touched on it very briefly earlier in the story section, but I often had to stop my progress entirely just to go do some random mission to boost my level up, or go exploring around some random tomb, or eliminate some bandit camp just to get XP so that I'd be ready and not instantly die when some guard nicks my arm because he's 3 levels higher than I am. Like, so here's what I mean. There's one quest where I had to fight some guy called the Poisoner, and he was 3 levels higher than I was at the time. Well, long story short, there was nothing I could do to him. Like, it didn't matter how I approached him, like assassinations, whatever. It was guaranteed to be a long, drawn-out fight where I gave him paper cuts with my sword. Well, he could basically one-shot me, and if I was lucky, he would two-shot me. And this was the turning point for me. Like, this is where I decided that I absolutely had to grind, or at the very least buy the special microtransaction that saves you time when grinding, but I wasn't going to do that, so I had to grind the old-fashioned way, for future quests. Just to avoid more battles like this one. This one battle with the Poisoner, that's when I was like, no, this is enough. I've had enough. I ended up not grinding to kill the Poisoner, just to see if I even could, and eventually I did kill him. But that was it for me. Like, I realized I couldn't just go through without every single battle being some slog fest, where my tiny damage numbers paled to their one-hit kill numbers if I was under-leveled. Like, the leveling system also goes onto the new equipment menu that you can equip as well. Like, some arbitrary number is telling me that I absolutely cannot equip this cloth hood because you need to be like level 30 to put it on, but you're only level 27. Like, why? That's stupid. This isn't like Fallout 3 where you need power armor training before you could actually use power armor. You know, and the goal of power armor training is to prevent something like Iron Man 2 from happening, where the guy breaks his own spine by turning too hard.
No grave, immediate threat here. Is that Justin Hammer?
Right leg up.
How did Hammer get in the game?
Arm up.
Justin, you're on TV. Focus up.
Okay, give me a left switch. Left is going to turn to the right. Oh, shit! Oh, shit!
Wow.
I'd like to point out that that test pilot survived.
I think we're done.
Like, this is a cloth hood. It's all just so arbitrary and screams fake difficulty and padding. Like, other RPGs, you know, they might have a stat system. Like, you need 9 strength to wield this heavy battle axe effectively or something. But in Odyssey, it's just levels. And that's it. It makes no sense. Especially from an in-universe perspective. Like, we're reliving the journey of Alexios through the Animus. So why is the Animus arbitrarily limiting what we can put on. It's a cloth hood. Like, and this goes into assassinations as well. Like, sometimes I would sneak up to some high-ranking officer in a fort, and they're sleeping, and I can't instantly kill him. Why? Why can't I just slice him in the jugular vein? He's not wearing neck armor. In fact, I'm amazed NPCs even sleep at all with all that heavy armor. Like, sometimes, even with the critical assassination skill that lets you boost your assassination damage at the cost of 1 adrenaline bar, it still sometimes doesn't kill these guys in their sleep, and it makes no sense.
You know, you shouldn't jump around when this nice woman's holding a sharp pair of scissors. If you move, she could slip and slice your jugular vein on accident. There's no way to stitch the jugular. All of your blood will be on the floor in 4 minutes. I've seen this. I've done this. You don't want this. Well, at least it's a good time to shave his neck. I would get him quick. When I was your age, I already killed 7 men. Maybe you should grow up.
Now, part of this is likely because I was playing on Nightmare difficulty, which is the hardest difficulty. Because what Nightmare does, it turns into some like Dragon Ball Z type of thing, where one power level always beats the lower power level because Goku's number is higher than, I don't know, Nappa's number or something. But it still really bugs me that increased numbers is the focus of the higher difficulty and not better AI or something. I don't know, perhaps instead of higher numbers, just have more night patrols, or just more guards in the fort. Or have, you know, an extra couple of guards standing right at the reinforcement beacon, just in case they need to light it off because you failed a stealth section. They're like, oh, an intruder, boom, you know, beacon lit. I don't know. Personally, this is a, you know, personally, I would rather have the guards able to kill me fairly quickly, as long as I could do the same to them, with the challenge being more about slipping in and out, and worrying that, oh no, he's 4 levels higher than I am, I can't do this at all. Even in his sleep, I can't slit his throat with my blade, because he's too high and won't kill him. Like, what? That doesn't make any sense. So naval combat. Now, I haven't played Black Flag, but I know that this is basically the same team that developed Black Flag. So they brought naval combat back, except they did it with Greek warships this time. I wasn't a fan of it. Now, maybe this also had to do with the difficulty level I was playing on, but I often recall I felt like my ship was made of papier-mâché, and I was fighting actual warships with a papier-mâché warship. Like, there were legitimately times where I preferred just boarding an enemy ship single-handedly rather than get into a naval combat scenario, because I can't recall a single instance of an enemy ship being by itself, and thus I was always outnumbered, which got frustrating really quickly. It wasn't until I'd gotten some substantial upgrades in that I viewed naval combat with less trepidation, but by then the game was almost over, so what was the point? It's not all bad. I found that once I'd leveled up appropriately and had some good gear, that forts became easier to clear out, you know, targets were easier to kill, especially once you have magic arrows that go through walls. And admittedly, it's cheap, but it's effective. I found the Cult of Cosmos system to be very good, actually. It's very interesting. I think it could use a few refinements and some quality of life improvements, but overall I like the idea behind it. It's the concept of this network of important people who absolutely need to die is something that goes back to the very first game, and being able to just hunt these people down individually and piece together who the next person was by finding a clue, you know, on the body of the previous person, I think it was a good move. Yeah, it was great. I wish more had done with it, though. Most of the characters on this big hit list were fairly unmemorable. They usually just had a very short blurb of a paragraph explicitly telling you why they're doing all this evil stuff they're doing and how evil they are, and it has none of the subtle nuance of the first game's Templars, who, like, even when they were doing cruel and evil things, they at least tried to, like, justify themselves or show why they believed that actually you're in the wrong, not them. You think we're evil, but I think I'm doing good. You're evil. Like, the one that sticks out to me the most is in the very first Assassin's Creed game, there's the Doctor. And, you assassinate him, and basically he tells you, he was like, I was doing, like, I had a purpose here. Like, yes, it was cruel, but, I was helping them, and you just can't comprehend my methods. Like, that's what I'm talking about. Like, as it was, like, very few characters in Odyssey got that kind of treatment, and even fewer were ever believable at all. Like, those few who did get to, like, explain their motives, like, there was, I think, one guy, like, I believed him, and that was because his family had been kidnapped, and he was being forced to do these crazy things, otherwise his wife and daughter would die. That I believe. Everyone else, like, the leader of the cult explains, like, her motivations, and it's just like, yeah, I don't believe you. I don't believe you at all. And it's a far cry from the days of Haytham Kenway from Assassin's Creed 3. Now, that guy, he made the Templars sound like a legitimate option against the Assassins rather than be just generic bad guys. Like, Haytham Kenway, to me, is the epitome of what a good, quotes, air quotes, you can't see, the good Templar character should be. Like, it should be, he is the perfect amount of morally gray. Like, I mean, in one lens, you could see, oh no, you're completely evil, but on the other side of things, like, but you kind of have a point. And I didn't have that connection in Odyssey. It never felt like that to me. The mercenary system, I basically saw it as a watered-down version of the Nemesis system from, like, the Shadow of Mordor or Shadow of War games. I say watered down because each mercenary only has 2 traits, as opposed to the myriad traits in the Shadow of War games. And basically, they only exist to be killed or recruited to be a ship lieutenant to further your own progress, or the other purpose of them was a way to try and stop the player from, like, mass murdering entire cities via the bounty system, which admittedly is a bit broken. Like, even killing sleeping guards will accrue a bounty if there's another guard sleeping next to him. Like, the sleeping guard is reporting you in his sleep for stealth killing the sleeping guard next to him. And the world, of course, magically knows you're murdering guards, and they're putting out a bounty on you in this age before radio or the internet. Now, this is a problem not limited to just this game. Like, this is a systemic problem since at least AC2. So I can't begrudge it too much. But the guards sleep reporting me was just insane. Like, AC1 had something similar, but when you assassinated someone, like, all the bells in town were ringing, and, like, all the guards knew, like, someone important had died, and they were after anyone suspicious, which was you. Decked out in your white robes with all your weapons, hanging off your belts. So they just went for you immediately. I don't know. It's just, there's so many, like, little things. It just kept appearing just over and over and over, like, throughout the game. Like, so many times a quest objective was go to fort, get object from fort, or rescue prisoner from fort. But to rescue the prisoner from the fort, you had to basically kill the whole fort, because they would just run out into the open out the front door, and all the guards would, like, basically kill them. So to get them out the door safely, you had to first kill everyone in the fort so the guy could just make an uninterrupted run towards the fort. And I don't know, it's just, it got repetitive after a while, especially after Origins, which was a lot of the same thing. Overall, I found the game to be enjoyable, but in the words of the great Bilbo Baggins, like, towards the end, I felt thin, sort of stretched. Like, butter scraped over too much bread. Like, it was to the point that there are many areas that I didn't even bother going to. I left side quests uncompleted because by the end I just didn't care anymore. Like, I'm the guy who completed 100% of the map in Origins. I got 100% sync rating in like AC3 and Brotherhood. Like, I even collected all the flags in the first game one time, and believe me, I'm never doing that again. But I did it one time just because I wanted to. But Odyssey was too much. Odyssey was worse than the flags for me. Like, I had to look up a guide to find the flags in AC1, and Odyssey, I'm just like, you know what, this whole island, I don't care. If there's no cultists, there's no main quest, I don't care, I'm not going there. It was just too much for me. I think the game would have worked better if it had been a bit smaller and a slightly more tightly packed experience without the level gating. Because the enemies constantly level up with you, so there's no points. They're always on like a slightly tougher playing field to where you can't just insta-kill them. It just bugged the crap out of me. So I'd say buy it if you really like big, sprawling worlds and fancy superpowers, or if you just need a really long game to waste some time away with. Like, I don't regret buying the game, but I do regret losing some of the time needed to complete the game to the point I did, which was all 3 of the game's main quest lines. Like, according to the Uplay launch, I've spent 102 hours in this game. More than I've spent in Origins total, with all the Origins DLC total, and there's still so much of the map I haven't even done. Like, I haven't even touch the DLC. I don't know if I even will touch the DLC, but like, honestly, it was too big for me. It was too big. So yeah, like, overall, like, I'd give this game a meh. That's my official rating, meh. It's not completely terrible, but it didn't win my heart over like older Assassin's Creed titles have done in the past. So thanks for watching, everyone. What did you think of this review? Don't forget to leave a comment below. And as always, if you liked what you saw here, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. More LPs and eventually more reviews once I finish the games will be on their way. Darksiders 3 is most likely the next game that's going to get a review here in a bit, but I'll have to finish it first, because I don't review unfinished games. So, thanks again, everyone, for joining me today on the Enthusiasts channel. My name is Axalon. I'll see you guys next time.